Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to our community, coming to you from the I've Decided Studios here in Peoria, Illinois. I'm Andy Thornton, President and CEO of the Greater Peoria Family YMCA. Happy to have you with us today. The Our Community podcast is sponsored by the YMCA, and I've Decided. Have you ever thought about the patterns shaping your daily life? From morning routines to evening habits, these behaviors hold the key to your future success. In today's show, we're going to help you recognize these patterns and understand their influence on your journey toward achieving your goals. But first, let me introduce my guest, Mr. Brett Beechler.
Andy.
Beechler's Automotive, right?
Yes. Beechler's Tire and Automotive Center is the official name now. But
okay.
Yeah.
Beechler's been around for a long time.
Yes, it has been. My grandpa started it in February 1951.
Okay.
This is interesting.
So 80 plus years.
Yep. 73. But he started on the corner of McClure and North Street. He was there for a very short period of time while they built this. Wow. They built a 2-bay facility at the corner of University and War Drive. He started on a $25 investment.
Wow.
And, worked his tail off 7 days a week, building the business. It originally was a 2-bay. And then in about 1970, 71, they built the current 5-bay and then demoed the 2-bay that was in front. We have a lot of photos inside the business that depict that. And then progressed through it. My grandpa obviously started it. My dad and uncle owned the business after my grandpa passed in 1984. My dad since then had purchased out my Uncle Don, and my Uncle Don was still a genius tech, worked on vehicles for many years. And then my dad's passing in January of this year, he and I worked with each other for 36 years.
No kidding.
So we've since grown. 2015, we built another facility on site that gave us a capacity.
It's in the rear there, right?
Yep, it's in the rear. It's a Mobile One Lube Express facility. It's our complete customer waiting area.
Okay.
And then about 2 years ago, we added 2 more bays. So that put us up to 10 bays. It's a tire and alignment bays.
Wow.
We actually converted the old car wash into tire and alignment bays.
Cool.
Funny story. Priest went through our car wash and destroyed it accidentally. It was an accident. And once he destroyed the car wash internally, we decided we're going to turn this into producing for vehicles versus having car washes, because car washes are very competitive nowadays, and you don't get into those things lightly.
No.
So we just took
they're all over the place.
We just took the insurance money and invested in tire equipment.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, because those car washes are all over the place. Monthly
they're all
membership
over the place.
packages,
Absolutely.
everything, right?
And that's how everything's won and lost in our day and age, is memberships. I mean,
Sure.
All the workout gyms know that they're hoping to get a bunch of people in there that pay and don't use them.
No, not us at the Y.
Not you at the Y. Not you at the Y.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
We're not a Planet Fitness.
Yes, you're not a Planet Fitness.
We're not providing pizza and donuts.
So I started at the business. Funny story. I that was when the Chili's up at University in Glen first opened, and I was as shy as I possibly could be. And my mom was like, "Hey, you're a paper boy. You've been a paper boy for 4 years. Why don't you consider going out and getting a job?" My dad said the same thing. And I said, well, I kind of would like to work at the family business, but I think I want to work at Chili's. And They both kind of looked at me like, you don't talk to the wall and you're going to work at Chili's. So I've been working at the business, mowing the grounds, tending the grounds,
Sure.
cleaning garbage cans, all that stuff since I was like 13. And lo and behold, I ended up deferring and going to the family business. It really brought me out of my shell.
Yeah.
I was very happy it did that, and worked full service. You remember the days of full service?
Yeah, I do.
Worked full service and did some oil changes and tires, as part of the business, and then ended up graduating from Peoria High and went to ICC for 2 years, and then went to Bradley. Graduated from Bradley, and a year after getting out of Bradley, I did what I never thought I would do. I left the business.
Oh, wow.
My fiance and I at the time, she had an opportunity to move to Tampa, Florida.
Okay.
So we moved to Tampa, Florida, and then we moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and we ended up parting ways, but we ended up moving. She moved back to Peoria. I moved up to Michigan and then off to Denver, Colorado for a short period of time. So for 4 years, I got to travel the country. Never thought in a million years I would do that. But I still believe God had a plan for me, because he knew I didn't want to do that, but he knew I also needed the growth. If you're going to come back into a family business, you can't have a mindset where you're thinking only about the things inside your business. You've got to be able to think outside your business. And I was able to use that experience and bring that corporate experience back into the company. And when my dad invited me back into the company, I didn't know this until probably a year ago. He was running out of gas. Like, he just was having he was just mentally running out of gas to being able to lead the company, and he needed
You're talking
horsepower
about
to come back.
physical strength, physical stamina.
It wasn't necessarily physical. He just was running low on ambition to try to move the business to the next level.
Sure.
And when he invited me back into the business, I thought, you know what, I'm done answering to bosses in the corporate world. I'm wired to answer to clients and consumers much better than I am to answer to a boss any day. But I think it was a good experience only because I was answering to bosses at that time. And then when I came back, it helped me gain some perspective on being a boss to other people.
Sure. Yeah.
In the end, I have two sets of customers. I've got the folks that come through my door, and I've got the guys and the gals that I take care of in my organization. This is not a dictatorship. I learned that many years ago. You have to ebb and flow. You got to work with them. You got to coach them. You got to teach them the why. And I really enjoy doing that with people. I think I'm getting better at it. I'm not a master at it by any means, but I work at it every day to try to pull people into doing the things that we need to get them to do in an organization. It's kind of like that book, Good to Great by Jim Collins. Yep. Fantastic read. I'm sure you've read it.
Yep.
And it's all about getting people on the bus who want to drive.
Getting them in the right seats.
Getting them in the right seats.
Right? Understanding where their strengths are and how they work with others and putting them in the right seats.
Exactly. And driving them forward and letting them be basically leaders within your organization.
Yeah. Empower them to do the work that needs to be done.
Which early in my career, I had a hard time with. Like,
it's hard.
I was one of those guys that like Kim, everybody knows Kim, that runs about 150 miles an hour. And I'm like, why can't everybody keep up?
Right.
And it wasn't that I'm better than them.
Right.
God wired my brain to be an entrepreneur and see things that other people can't see. But at the same time, they see things that I don't see. Yeah. So it becomes a good compliment in any organization that you got to learn to listen, because two of these and one of those is a ratio at which we're supposed to listen. Yeah. So
no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. When you take the time to know and understand the people who you work with or work for you, and understand what their strengths are, and then putting them in positions to be successful, the business is going to be better because of that. When you align their strengths with their passions and needs of the organization, that's where it gets productive and
very
sweet,
much so.
Right? And people want to be in an environment like that. So that's to me, that's a foundation or a cult. The foundation of culture. Is make sure people are in the right spot.
If you look at my business card, on it says, yes, I'm the owner, blah, blah, blah. But the next line is culture leader.
Yeah.
And absolutely. Because it's my job to set the culture and to set the vision for where we're going. Now, do I do that really well all the time? No, but I want to instill that in my employees, like, hey, we got to have a good culture around here. Right. And there's a bunch of different line items that go underneath.
Yeah, well, whether you're striving to create the culture or not as a leader, you're creating the culture.
Yes,
it's whether or not you understand it and embrace it. Right,
that is a great way to put it. Whether or not you embrace it,
because it's being led by you.
Yes,
those that can understand it, appreciate it, and embrace it, and be intentional about it are the ones that I think find success in doing that. So that's awesome.
Yes.
Well, knowing a little bit more about you and what you've done, I think this conversation today about patterns is probably a pretty rich conversation we're about ready to get in, because I think you can lean into some of those experiences. But before we do, I know recently the Beaslers did a pretty cool thing, giving away a minivan to a needy family. And can you just share a little bit about that process?
Yeah, where
and how that
it
worked
started
out for you?
from and how it originated. I'm involved in a 20 group, which I highly advise for any small business owner to be involved in. You've got to be able to reach outside your walls, and sharpen your iron with other companies that are in like-minded businesses. I mean, I know people that are in not the same businesses and they're in 20 groups, but I belong to a group that has about 90 automotive shops around the country.
Okay.
And I have about 4 guys within this organization that I'm really close with. I mean, we're talking on a regular basis. I was talking to my friend out of Augusta, Georgia this morning we had a good hour-long conversation, just trying to understand benefits and how other organizations are doing it. And a friend of mine out in Eugene, Oregon, I call him the Big Bear. He's about 6'6" and about 280. He's just a big dude.
That's a big guy.
But he's like a big teddy bear. He is acquiring his 5th shop right now, but they started this program to give back to the community. Mm-hmm. And I saw this about 3 years ago, and I said, we need to do this, because God bless us with the ability to have so many really good quality customers that come in our door, that we have the ability to get these cars corrected, maintained up to par, and send them off to people that are much more in need than you or I are in any situation. And of course, you go into these situations and you're like, where do I start? Right. Like, I don't know where to start. And it just takes putting one foot in front of the other and just going, I'm going to do this, and we're going to figure this out along the way. Right. I was in search for about 1.5 years for a minivan. Mm-hmm. I knew when we were going to give it away, it's going to be for a family in need. Mm-hmm. We're going to have a nomination process. And I didn't want to do a sedan. I'm not necessarily opposed to a sedan, but the likelihood that I'm going to give this car away, a sedan, to somebody with 1 or 2 kids was pretty low because of the stories that I'd heard. Mm-hmm. So finally had a van come along. Actually, it's an old neighbor friend of mine that brought his vehicle in. It got to the point where he's like, hey, it's got 220,000 miles on it. I really don't want to do all this to it. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll give you the difference on Kelley Blue Book minus the repairs, and this is what we're going to do. And he's a follower, and he's like, that is awesome. Yeah. Like, this is so cool. I want to be part of this. So we got the deal done, donated the van. My guys upgraded the van. Our tire company donated a set of tires. I had a gent who does car detailing, and you can imagine what a van looks like after a wife and child and three boys, mm-hmm. what it looks like on the inside. It looked like brand new. Sweet. When he was finished. Parts supplier donated quite a chunk of parts on the van. And so we go through this whole process, and as all these nominations are coming in, my brain is starting to get overwhelmed. Like, how are we going to do this? I knew we were going to have a nomination team, and they kept climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing, and we're up to 150, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And I'm reading these stories like, how do people live like this? Yeah. And it's not a judgmental statement. It's like, how do people survive? Right. Like, one of these stories was a lady and her 4 kids that took the city bus everywhere, school, grocery store. And you read through these, and I'm like, I wish I had like 10 cars to give away right now. Right. So we get through the whole process, and there's 202, I think was the final total, 40 off to each of our committee. We had a committee of 5, two clients, customers, 2 internal employees, and then my wife and I. And my wife and I were sitting there reading. I'm kind of reading through them, and I'm reading them to my wife. And we got to about the 5th one, and I read it to her, and she goes, "That's the one." And I said, "Hang on, honey," because sometimes women tend to be emotional. I'm just kidding. I said, "Hang on, honey. We got 4 other people going through processes. Right. We'll put this one off to the side. This is our top one. We all picked 2 from it." Mm-hmm. Okay. So Monday night, we got all the 5 people together in our conference room downstairs, and I saved ours for the last. So I'm reading through all 10 that everybody took and whittled from the 202 down to 10. And there are some really great stories. So I finally popped this one out, and I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna, but we really like this one. Mm-hmm. But you guys decide. And I looked up, and there's like 5 people with tears in their eyes after I read the story, and I just kind of put it down, and they're like, that's the one. Wow. And so it was really cool because this lady from their church nominated them, and they didn't really know them. Oh, wow. But they're listening to WCIC, and she said, I was coming back from working out in Chillicothe, and usually WCIC breaks up where I come up the hill, mm-hmm. and I don't hear it. She said that time it was clear as a bell, and this got announced on CIC, and wow. She said, I gotta nominate these people, the Repkes. And so she hand delivered it to me, which said something also. Sure. And then told me a couple stories about back in the old day when we had full service. And so I called her, and I'm like, hey, we picked it. She goes, okay. And she starts crying on the phone. And I'm like, how do you not be thankful when you go through a process like that and you get to be part of it? Right. And then the whole delivery process, when it went to the people with the van, I was kind of nervous for them. But then we go to their house with the van, and I'm kind of hiding around the corner, and they queued me up, and I drove the van into the street, into the driveway, and mom comes out. Well, the dad had a carotid artery stroke. I think it was pretty severe. Like they had to send him to Chicago to get treatment for a month and a half, and they didn't have a reliable van to go back and forth. And he wasn't there, so she FaceTimed him, and he had teary eyes, and she was teary eyes. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the coolest thing ever. So now, what's really cool about this is it's inspired. I have a car sitting on my lot. Somebody's already donated
for another donation.
Literally this morning, I have a longtime customer. Her name is Molly. I won't tell you her last name, but she said, I want to donate our Sienna. So it's really neat because my wife at first was like, well, we can give away one every month. I'm like, whoa, horsey. Like, you don't understand the prep work it takes to get a car ready, safe, on the road,
Right.
plus all the nomination process, doing it once a month. I said, I could see this like once a year, twice a year, maybe 3 to 4 times a year at the most. But I said, there's a lot of horsepower that goes into one of these things.
Sure.
You just don't pull a car out and go, okay, everybody send your nominations in. So I believe we're going to have a van here pretty soon that we can donate yet another one.
That's pretty cool.
And I love the name Keys for Hope. I really want to get this out more and more and more. We learned a lot of things. I'm not going to bore you with what we learned, but I'm truly looking forward to the next time we're able to do this because, I mean, in business, in the end, what's our job? It's really simple. It's to separate ourselves from the other competition, that the rifle competition that's in our market. I just want to be different, and I'm not trying to be a standout guy or anything like that. I just want to be different. How do we give back to the kingdom?
Right.
And this is really our way of trying to give back, and it's a humbling experience for me.
I'll bet.
Honestly, I loved it.
That's a really cool story, and I'm sure there's more to it. So 202 people, they were all nominated by somebody else? Or
yes.
Did anybody self-nominate?
There were a handful of self-nominations.
That says something in itself, that there's that many people that took the time to thinking of somebody else too, right?
And they all weren't quite as deep as they could have been if you're going to take that time. So I'd encourage anybody, if they're watching this, if you ever put a nomination into any one of these deals, tell your story.
Right.
Like become the Picasso on a piece of paper and tell your story. Give the person your why. Like, why do I want to? You have the platform. Do it.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a handful of them that were just like 1 or 2 lines, and I'm like, okay, well, I need to know more.
Right.
I need to know more why you need a vehicle. So
it's a cool story and a cool project, and it looks like it's gonna just build upon itself.
I really believe it is.
I really
believe it is. So, and it's really neat because I share it with other guys in our 20 group, and it's inspired them to go out in their community. And actually, funny thing you say, I just read an article that there's a shop. I can't remember what state it's in, but there's a shop that has a scholarship fund that they have for folks in need of repairs on their car, and they can't afford it. So it's kind of like a pay it forward type deal. Like they have certain demographics of their customer who will put into a fund, and they have a special fund at their bank, and they leave that just for people in need of repairs. So it's something I'm going to definitely entertain. And because I had a lot of people come forward to me and just say, is there any way I can just help people? And I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of giving people out there that
absolutely
you just need to ask.
Yeah.
I think is probably the biggest aspect of that. So
I agree with you 100%, especially in this community. I found in my work at the Y that Peoria is just a giving community.
They are very giving community.
A lot of people here that are generous, and especially when somebody puts the time in to put a program together, right? That it's going to go to somebody who truly needs it. People really rally behind that, and you're experiencing that just through this process.
Yeah, and this is just a little thimbleful of what I'm sure you experience in the community.
It's great. I love the work that I get to do and the people that we get to help, and I love the part of it where people just respond. Yeah, because they have extra and they want to help support that. And anytime that we put something together like that, we see.
To me, it's like a vision into people's hearts. Even more so than before that. I'm not saying you would have had a less perspective of them if they didn't donate, but it's like when people open up those doors, and even in my campaign with the Peoria County Board, I'm amazed at how many people are like, we need fiscally responsible people on the board. Here's my donation to help you get there. And I'm like, okay. Never realized there's a big part of the community that likes to do that and enjoys doing that. So, sometimes you just have to ask. That's right.
That's right. You got to tell a story. That's good. All right. Well, let's talk about patterns. So the I've Decided community that Kim leads, Kim writes an article every week. The subject matter this week is patterns,
Mm-hmm.
and patterns are defined as something that repeats in a predictable way. We're going to talk a little bit about it and just help give people perspective of why patterns are important and
Mm-hmm.
how we can learn from the patterns in our life, that how they help us either help us be successful or maybe deter us a little
Right.
bit, because patterns could be positive or negative
Right.
when you think about it. So, when you think about patterns, how much do you think about it, really? When I read Kim's article, I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I spend enough time in this space just thinking intentionally about the things that I do. As I read it and reflected on it, I started to realize maybe some things that I could be better at, or maybe eliminate from my life, that would allow me to be a little more focused and successful in the areas where I need to be. But how much? I know you're an avid cyclist, right? You're big on fitness. I understand that about
I
you.
do my best.
And to be successful in that, you've got to have patterns. I think that you're striving for, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be able to ride your bike to Milwaukee,
Mm-hmm.
and those things that you do.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just get out. You don't just get on a bike and do that, right? You prepare.
You can. It just takes a couple months to prepare for something like that.
So in your life, I mean, how much time do you spend thinking about the patterns in your life and how they propel you forward?
I'm a big advocate of the patterns, AKA I call them muscle memory.
Okay.
I want to get myself to the point where I don't have to think about the good patterns, if you say,
Right.
that you're trying to develop in life. I mean, one of the things that you'll laugh, if you were to go to any one of my guys or gals at the business, I go and say, what does Brett say all the time? He says, major on the minors. Consistently, just major on the minors, and you won't have such a challenging time in anything you do in life. And I think people.
So unpack that a little bit. What do you mean by major?
So I think sometimes we're looking for the Babe Ruth and the home runs all the time.
Sure.
And I think in any part of our world, we got to do chip shots, base hits, chip shots, whatever sports analogy you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what overwhelms many human beings is they try to bite off too much before getting into it. It's like the bike ride, and Kim and I have talked about the bike ride, and the first day it's over a century. And in the biking world, the century is kind of a neat accomplishment to bike 100 miles in a day. And the average person sits there and goes, oh, I can never ride 100 miles. Yeah. And I say, you know what? There are two things you got to get ready. Your legs, of course, and your tush. The tush is the hardest part to get ready on a bicycle. And I said, but otherwise you're not, it's like going for a long hike. And you got to think of it in increments of 10 miles at a time. In general, like our bike ride, we're taking 4 rest stops throughout the day. It's every 20, 25 miles, you're taking a rest, and everybody's joyful. Nobody's, falling off their bike. But they did that. And I've had people that have never ridden a bike before come on this ride. And they did that by just ramping up their miles. I mean, there have been many years where my daughter, her longest ride would be 40 miles. And then her first century of the year is on our bike ride. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's all starting off small, getting patterns going, getting into the motion. It's like the hardest thing to do with a vehicle is get it in motion. Once it's up to speed, it's easy to keep up to speed, and less energy to maintain it. I mean, that's life for any of us.
Right.
So I just think small chunks are the biggest thing that people can think about and build into muscle memory when you're developing patterns.
Yeah.
So
I would agree with you, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that when you break it down into smaller goals, smaller steps, it becomes easier to achieve, right? Yep. How do you eat the elephant, right? The old analogy, it's one bite at a time.
Everybody's heard that one, and it's a great one.
But it
sticks.
It's absolutely true, though.
So,
and patterns are also predictable. I mean, we know that, or we can look at the patterns in our life and predict where they're going to lead us, I think. And so thinking about your experience in the automobile repair industry, right? That Beechlers has been around, I think I said 80 years, but I don't know how I did that math, Brett.
That's okay.
That was really bad math on the spot.
You crossed a century, like I don't
know how I did that.
Threshold.
I wanted to own up to my mistake earlier. But you've probably seen patterns that started with your grandfather, passed down to your dad, now passed down to you, that have helped you Beechlers become what it is today.
To identify which patterns. I've identified both good and not so good patterns.
Right, but that's important.
It's important. I think the recognition of that, because I think short thinking sometimes is, well, I always say the biggest killer of an organization is, well, that's how we've always done things.
Amen.
And I tell my guys that, like, I want to flip the tables every day. Like, how can we be different? How can we do things differently? How can we be more efficient? One of the good patterns I acquired from my dad is we used to be open on Saturdays. We used to actually be open on Sundays. And every Saturday he would work. He would come into the business. I kid you not, with an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper filled with how we can improve. Because when you're in the trenches of any organization and you work on the front line, that's where you gather the most data. So literally it was a pattern of seeing, okay, he recognized things. He wants to improve the company. And that's a habit I will never, ever, ever take credit for, because of his ability to see things a couple miles down the road versus seeing everything that's right in front of you. But from a standpoint of, what I got from my grandpa, it was hard work. It was hard, intelligent work. And I always saw him working his tail off, and he wasn't afraid to work. He wasn't afraid to work 7 days a week, which by design, we're really not designed to run 7 days a week. But at that time, in a business startup, it was necessary at that time. So I've truly enjoyed working in a family business. I don't ever take it for granted. One of the percentages of successes in a family business is very small. It's in the single digits. How many third generation businesses survive? Really? And I understand the challenge, and I certainly don't want that to happen to me. But I think overall, I think I was blessed with an organization. I shouldn't say blessed. I had to purchase it from my dad. So it's not like I got it for free. Right. But I don't think you should get anything for free in life. I remember the first time, I think I was like 12, and I said, Dad, BMX has got a new bike out. I really want to buy it. And he said, okay, go get a job. I mean, I was like, what? You're not going to give me any money? He goes, no, I'm not going to give you money. And that instilled, at the time, of course you're disappointed as a young kid, 12 years old. But I was like, all right, I want that bike, and I'm going to go get a paper route. And I'm going to go wake up at 4:30 in the morning to go do my morning paper route. So there are a lot of good habits that were developed early in my life, which I'm very appreciative of. Yeah,
no, that's good. And the other thing that I think is important to understand, when we talk about patterns, is you aren't successful as a business owner without having some intentionality and putting some patterns into your life. And you talked a little bit about that, what you've taken from your dad and how you look at the business. But it doesn't happen by happenstance, right? It happens because of hard work, because of focus, because of determination, and how you applied that.
And I've even switched that hard work to smart work. And and it's not an uppity thing. I just, because I can work hard with the best of them.
But is it really getting you where you need to go?
Is it really getting you where you need to go? And I like to step back and think intelligently, because, it's like I tell my guys, I said, I can go in and clean the toilets. I have no problem. It's not beneath me. I don't mind cleaning the toilets. But if I'm cleaning the toilets every day, I'm not running this business at 30,000 foot view. Right. I need somebody else to do that job. And it's not beneath me. Right. But if I'm constantly cleaning toilets and doing things that other people are not, doing through their delegation, then I'm doing you guys a disservice by not running this thing from the lead edge of the business. So intentionality is a huge thing to me. Processes and procedures are really big, which I'm in constant development in my business, and I'm still working on many things in a very I'm in the incline part, and there are people looking at me like, you got great processes at your business, and I'm like, I don't think they're that great. Yeah. It's something I still have to diligently, intentionally work on every day. But I also have the great opportunity to see outside my business and see other organizations that run like a top. Right. And I'm aspiring to be more and more like that.
Do you find that the patterns that, that help you be successful, and I would imagine, I think I know the answer to this, but do you find that those patterns are specifically aligned with the goals that you have for your business or for your personal life?
It's funny because the business coach that I have is very adamant that every year you need to have short, mid, long-term goals professionally and personally too. And when I first started looking at this, like, personally, what are you talking about personally? I just need them professionally. He's like, no, you're doing them personally too. So I had to put down a piece of paper. Okay, I will go on a date with my wife every 2 weeks. I will, intentionally go somewhere with her. I will try to have a night with my daughter. And do I succeed at all of them all of the time?
Right.
No. But it's a good exercise. It
Mhm.
stretches your brain, especially when you put it on a piece of paper and not inside of a computer.
Mhm. What would you say to people that may be out there and maybe hearing this for the first time and are starting to think now about, okay, how do I evaluate the patterns of my own life and understand whether or not they're helping me or hurting me? What kind of advice or thoughts do you have around where do you start?
I think you start at your inner circle of people who you hang out with.
Asking for feedback?
Yeah, you're the average of the 5 people that you hang out with. I mean, where are they? Where are their goals? What are their aspirations? Do they just go along in life one day at a time with no plan?
Mm.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but for me, if I just muddle along, if I come into a weekend without a plan or a checklist, I kind of get lost because my brain goes about 150 miles an hour. So develop a structure, develop a plan, use a calendar.
Yeah.
I know that sounds really goofy, but
I don't think so.
I think it's really good to have blocks of time set off in your calendar.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard people say, well, you don't, as a leader of an organization, you don't really need a to-do list, but I need a to-do list. Yeah. I have to have a to-do list. I've got one on my phone that syncs with my computer, and it actually makes a noise when you click it off because our brains need that dopamine hit to say you got finished with something. My ultimate dopamine hit, those that have it on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
So I really think it's who you run with. And if you run with people who are not ambitious about growing in life, you're probably going to be the same way.
Yeah.
But that's my biggest advice is you are who you run with.
Yeah.
Whether it's good or bad.
My wife and I preach that to my kids all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Who you hang out with is who you become.
Yep.
Right. So you got to protect those friendships
Mm-hmm.
and those circles. It was interesting just earlier this week. I do a Bible study with my 2 oldest boys every
Mm-hmm.
Monday night. We get together and we're studying the book of John right now. And one of my kids actually repeated that back to me and said, Dad, you've been telling me all the time. It's about who do you circle yourself with?
That's right.
Right. And the influence that you have. And it's interesting to have that conversation. And he was reminding me of that in my life right now.
Oh, no kidding.
But it's so important, though. The influences of those that we hang out with are so critical for our success in our own life.
Yeah.
And I think that's a point that people really have to evaluate is who are your closest friends and how are they helping you be successful? How they help holding you accountable? It can't all be cheerleaders for you, just rah rah. And they got to be people that you can sit down with and say, hey, you might need to be thinking about this behavior or this thing that you're doing, right? Those people that can hold you accountable. And if you don't have those type of people in your life, it's going to be hard to be successful.
What's interesting is I had a friend I went to high school with, and he surrounded himself with people who gave him attaboys, and he was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And he's my age and died of that recently. And there was nobody in his life that checked him and said, you need to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Like you got a wife, you got kids, you got grandkids, you need to stop.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I want to have friends tight enough to check me.
Yeah.
And I have to be transparent and allow myself to be vulnerable.
Right.
But at the same time, I want to select and choose friends that go, hey, Brett, I don't know about that. I think you should reconsider that. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Let me listen to you and process it. Because, we in our flesh get defensive in nature.
Sure we do.
And we have to guard ourselves of that.
Yeah. And it's so important. Mm-hmm. And you talked a little bit about this earlier in the conversation about, small steps to build progress. And that was one of the points that was in the article that Kim wrote this week too, is how patterns are enablers. And this whole concept of habit stacking, of understand what your goal is, and then create strategies that are going to get you to that goal, and they create momentum for you if you approach them from the right perspective and do that. And I think that's a really important point to think about too, is think about the habits in your life and are they aligned with your goals and your dreams and the things that you want to accomplish, and then how can one habit turn into 2 habits that are positive,
right,
and turn into 3, and just kind of breed themselves that way. And I think
that's really I'm sure you've heard this, and I'm sure most people on this have heard this, but our brains require on average 21 times to solidify a habit.
Yeah.
And that's why I believe, and Kim runs into this too, people have a really challenging time when they do it 5 or 6 or 7 times and then they give up because they didn't hit that kind of sweet spot to go, okay, if I attain 19, 20, 21, 22, 22 times, I can get that energy up on top and then maintain it versus the start out. I see a lot of people fail at things.
Right. And you want them to become kind of subconscious that you do it, but you have to do it a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And you mentioned muscle memory earlier on in the conversation. It's just like working out with weights.
It's no different.
You don't get muscle the first time you go and work out, right?
You do for like an hour. It's all swollen.
Right, but you don't start to notice it until over time.
Right.
And it takes repetition.
Right.
And then your body becomes used to that exercise. And it's the same thing in what we're talking about from professional development or professional experiences. You got to continue to do it. And you can't give up early. And in today's world, we seek instant gratification all the time.
All of us.
We all do. And some of us are better at overcoming that than others. But it really, I think that makes it even harder because we don't see quick results. Then we want to move on to the next thing. And you got to stick with it.
Yeah.
And you got to fight through it.
Yep. That's the key. You got to fight through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that's important, and then we'll wrap up here, but the patterns in our life show us where our priorities are. Wherever you're spending your time, wherever you're spending your energy, that should tell you where your priorities are. Other people see it. And I think if you're honest with yourself and as you're evaluating these things, if you really evaluate what you're doing throughout a day or a week, or maybe document some of these things, they're going to show you whether or not your priorities are in the right spot.
I had a Dale Carnegie class probably 15, 18 years ago. And one of the exercises they had us do was to document your entire day. And I'm like, really?
Yeah, time study.
It was a time study. And as I wrote everything down, like I'm working on my email from this time to this time, and I'm doing this, from here to doing that. And your brain started recognizing like all the quadrants that you spend your time in, the 4 quadrants. And I'm like, I can probably line on veto that. I don't need to do this. Get this out of my life. And all of us can do that exercise. It's really simple. You just go into it and you go, we have a Great Dane. My wife and I walk her every night.
Great Dane? Wow, big dog.
And I don't say this out of judgment, but I sit there and I'm like, it's the same pattern every night. You'll see like, okay, I'm not peeping Tom or anything like that, but you'll walk by houses and you'll see, whether it's 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, you'll see the same houses with televisions on.
Right.
I'm not knocking television, but to me, television is a neutralizer. It's chewing gum for the brain. I don't mean that mean, but I'm just saying it puts us in idle, and it's a habit. I mean, God gifts us with 24 hours in a day, and what are we each going to do with that 24 hours in a day? And if you spend 4 hours a night, I mean, that's a chunk of your everyday existence sitting there watching television. And we're all guilty of it. We all have chewing gum time for our brains. We just veg out. But I look at those habits and I'm like, oh, you could do so much more with your life if you were doing something more productive. Again, I'm not judging because my wife sits there and gets on me. It sounds like you're judging. I'm like, no, I think humans have more capabilities than this.
Yeah, and that really comes down to the awareness
piece
of it, right? Understand where you're spending your time. And I think documenting it helps bring that to light for yourself. And then you can start to make some of those decisions. Well, before we wrap up today, you've got an important day coming up, right?
The one from 13 days from now?
Yeah, right. You're on the ballot for county board.
Yes.
Too, right? So tell everybody about that.
The biggest thing about county board, and I'm learning as we go too.
I'll bet.
Because I did not realize the functionality of the county board and how it affects each and every one of us. One of the big topics is, and everybody I come across, when I go knock on doors, I ask them, are you aware of the county budget? I've never had a person that tells me yes, because I didn't know either until I got into
You don't hear much about it.
The county board budget is $155 million a year.
It's huge.
They have sunsetting on December 31st, 2025. $30 million is going away.
Oh, wow.
That's ARPA money, American Rescue Plan Act.
Yeah, okay.
And I have inside information. I'm not going to disclose who it is, but this person explained to me that there is not a solid plan as to what the county board is going to do with $30 million going down to $125 million budget.
Wow.
Now, a typical politician is going to say, well, we got to find the revenue somewhere. I shouldn't say that. I call politicians out there that do this, they're creative revenue generators.
Mm-hmm.
And what I don't want, my prayer is if I win this seat, is I go in there and I don't become like everybody else.
Right.
Because I'm sitting there and I talk to people when I go to door and I go, hey, I run my business in the surplus, I run my home in the surplus, and I plan on taking that philosophy to the government. Peoria is a great place.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had the great opportunity to live other places. They were great too, don't get me wrong, but there is nothing like being able to commute 5 or 10 minutes away. There's nothing like the outdoor activities that Peoria has and the people and the generosity that our community has. I think it's a great community. I don't want to see it squashed by bad policy inside of our county, our city, or of course our state.
Right.
It's a big behemoth to turn around. But we just paid the highest property taxes ever. Many people don't know this, but we're the second highest property tax in the country.
Wow.
Illinois is. And quite frankly, I'm tired of having this black eye on our state and in our area. And I want to do my part. My wife and I are getting to the point. Yes, I got my blessing from my wife to do this because I did this 6 years ago, and she was like, I don't know. I don't know if you should do this. But we're both getting to the point in our life where our last daughter is getting married off next June. And it's time for me to start giving to the community in a different way.
That's great.
And selfishly, I don't necessarily want to do this because I'm getting to the part of my life where I'm like, hey, we're going to be footloose and fancy free, and we can go do things that we wouldn't normally do. I still think we can do them, but I also think that I need to take what knowledge and wisdom that I've learned throughout the years being in business and take that into a board setting. And I think the hardest part for me is if I do get on the board is in business, you come up with an idea that's going to make you better. You bounce it off of people inside your organization or people outside your organization or both. And a week later, you make the change.
Right.
Government's not necessarily
a little bit slower.
It's a little bit slower.
Yeah, you don't have necessarily.
I think that'll be the most challenging part for me is adapting to that.
Well, let me just say thank you for stepping up and being willing to serve. For those of you that live in Brett's district, consider him on the ballot when you vote here in a couple weeks. And thanks for joining us today here on the podcast. It's been a great conversation with you. And thank you out there for joining us this time. We look forward to seeing you next time on Our Community.